all the tutorials.
Yeah, and part of like there's a group that Dan Katz is
Yeah.
involved in round sites and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think the other thing maybe, you know, so yeah, I mean, I'm very it's not a footnote. Yeah, and I think that's probably one thing. I think it's also this interesting situation, which is a journal just constructed to kind of to get over the hoop of it appearing in schools.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a thing actually about, for me it seems to be that tools such as they don't lift somewhere. And it almost feels like that's the thing. If we're talking about that seems to be we'll talk about the rhythmic and yet yeah. So it's not. Yeah, and it really could. Right, I don't know. Maybe for publishers, the search is.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. But yeah. I'm sorry, I haven't. I'll pull it together. They've done a good job. It would be kind of nice to be able to Yeah, exactly.
Can I try and show my screen? I need to just be relaxed about it. Yes. Yeah, that's what I was just going to try now.
Oh, so you're the only speaker?
Yes, it's more of a discussion group, so I'm going to be speaking and just introduce everything, and then it'll be everyone. Probably a small group, so I think you can.
Small group.
Yeah, and this is like a handheld. Yeah, one of those would be great actually.
피디님 켜진 거예요?
Just gonna go say hello to the QFA folk while I get.
Yeah, sure.
Is there any virtual?
Probably. Yes. Yeah, there should be people online, and I'm expecting them to talk, but they've written slides.
Oh, that's just the discussion.
Yeah, just the session.
오.
I know in that session, some got.
네. 네, 잠시만요. 얘는 지금 껐어. 그 마이크 나오나요? 마이크 볼륨 나와요? 저 자동 조정을 풀어주세요. 더 올려주세요. 최대예요?
I was out the other night with them. They were like, no.
혹시 들어오신 분한테 들리냐고 한번 여쭤봐 주실래요? 들어오신 거구나. 아니, 꺼달라니까요. 끄셨어요?
크면 소리가 안 들리는
그러니까 지금 장래가 안 들리니까 그런 거잖아요.
그냥 무선이 원래 장내에서 안 들려요.
원래 안 들렸다고요?
네, 무선은 안 들려요.
들렸다는데요?
무선은 저쪽에서는 원래 장내에서 들리는데
네.
Yeah. Which they don't recognize at all.
Thanks for joining us.
No worries. No worries at all.
Have at least one person like, my boss is coming.
Oh, good. That's Ian.
Yeah.
네.
He was debating whether he
잠깐만요. 저기요. 죄송한데 여기 지금 공동에 그 스피커가 안 나오는 것 같은데. 그래요? 이걸로 조절하는 게 맞나요?
이게 혹시 저희 호텔 마이크이실까요?
아니요, 호텔 마이크.
Yeah.
아, 네네. 저희가 또 조정할 거예요.
아.
저희 5인패가 있어서 그걸로 할게요. 허리 좀만 줄여주세요. 더 줄여주세요. 드시면 되세요. 좀만 올려주세요. 좀만 올려주세요. 좀만 더. 됐어요. 이거 쓸 때를 좀 줄여야 될 것 같아요. 얘네 지금 볼륨이 좀 안 맞으니까.
이렇게 하고 있다가
네네네.
One big question asked.
됐다.
Do you actually want to maybe define an activity underneath the data policy group?
I think that would be my preference. But
네.
they didn't want to do. Which is why I'd like to leave it.
Yeah, cool.
I don't know if the data policy group really want us to.
Railroad there, really?
Yeah, I don't know. I get the sense that they're trying to get money.
But they're an interest group, right? So in theory, they should be the home of other working groups.
Okay.
And what they've done is they've set up an interest group as a working group. So technically, we can launch.
My boss, isn't it? Who the chair is.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure. Thankfully, Natasha's not my boss, so
Okay.
not any issue there. But on the other hand, we're from like different parts of the organization, so that might be it should be fine, which is great. Yeah, I don't think we're wrecking what they're trying to do.
No. I just don't know whether they like how our
Agenda.
group would fit kind of with their like that.
Yeah, look, honestly, it's us who's riding on the coattails of them. So it's true that they have to accept some chuckers. Otherwise, we have to go it alone, and that will be harder. Yeah. I don't think it should be a problem. That's concluding.
Yeah.
They're all, I mean, there's people with time on their hands.
Yeah.
It's not longer together than we thought it was.
That would home us under the software source
Like
code.
a half hour.
Which is another but that working group is,
So use of nine.
we're speaking as a really active participant in that one. I think we're all burnt out because it was a really,
And they do say.
it was a lot of engagement. It's just the sheer effort of like,
It's a normal.
500 bits of input. That's kind of Friday.
But it's.
I consciously chose not to get too involved. We already have Paula as a co-chair, and but I burned a lot of hours. Which is I don't regret. It's really great. I think maneuvering for, so we used to have Wing Fang on the co-chair of source code, which is good, and I think I'm wrangling for myself and for Paul. Yeah, so we could go. That's a, must admit, I don't understand the code data structures all that well, but is there energy there that we're missing out in the software source code space.
That's a good point. I think so there's a bunch of different class groups.
I think we'll just wait another minute or two for people to join online, and then we'll get going.
So we have a lot of their own class groups. I think they may vote.
Yeah.
But let me have a look.
Right. Well, I like to say that software is the lens that brings data into focus. So,
You're full of nice phrases.
yeah, right. You know, it's a uniquely actionable form of knowledge representation. You can tell I've been doing like policy level promotion of the area for the last couple of years. Yeah.
Right. I'm gonna get you to. Right, we're gonna make a start. Hugh and Tom, stop talking in the room. Hi everybody, welcome to this Birds of Feather session, looking at kind of code and what we might want to do as a community to kind of advance kind of code sharing in the broader sense of terms. We've got a few people in the room today, we've got a few people online, which is great. Thank you for those who are joining on sociable hours. There is a shared notes document I've put the link to in the chat. But otherwise, what I thought I would do is share my screen, present some slides just to introduce the session a bit, and then we can have a bit of a discussion and see where it takes us. I should probably also introduce myself to start with. I'm Lauren Cadwalder. I'm the Open Research Manager at PLOS. I have been working on kind of data and code related initiatives. So most recently working on a kind of code sharing policy at PLOS Computational Biology, which has left me with a
Lauren, your video and audio just dropped. If anyone can hear us at the other end, your video and audio is dropped.
So can people hear me at home or wherever you're coming from?
Yes, and we can see you.
Hooray! Right. Yeah. Okay. Did you hear any of what I said before?
No.
Oh. Okay. Right. I'll start from the very beginning again. Yay. Hooray. It's fine, don't worry. So hello everyone again. My name's Lauren Cadwalder. I'm from PLOS. And I work on code and data initiatives. And I've been doing some work recently on code sharing in one of our journals, PLOS Computational Biology, that led me to have a lot of questions around kind of code and what we should be doing. And for those who saw my session on Tuesday, hopefully it's got lots of kind of ideas going for you. And so I really wanted to talk today about kind of code sharing that supports articles and trying to work out, actually, should we try and align some efforts? And if so, what should those efforts be? The plan for today is that I'm going to talk through some slides to set the scene a bit, and then we'll have some time for discussion and try and work out if there's a kind of common theme we will agree that is interesting to take forward, and if so, what we should do. Right. Okay, a bit of housekeeping to start with. There are some notes. I've put a link in the chat, and I might attempt to do that again. Yes. Okay, there are the notes, the links in the chat. Please contribute any notes that you see fit. This is a hybrid session, so we do have people in the room and online. If you've got a question, please raise your hand, or perhaps we're a fairly small group, so it's probably safe to kind of unmute and just start speaking. For those of you in the room, we should have a microphone somewhere, so you don't have to, brilliant, come up to the podium each time. And I think this meeting is being recorded, but to be honest, I've lost track of these things. Right. My slide's going to move. There we go. So just some introductions. I just wanted to kind of say thank you to the group who helped me kind of put this session together today. There were kind of 5 of us working on it, trying to decide what we thought the important points were to surface. So I just wanted to give a big thank you to them. So I'm up there. There is Tom as well is in the room with me, and the other organisers are probably asleep somewhere. So I just wanted to just take a minute so everyone can introduce themselves to each other in the group. So we can start with, I'll stop sharing, then maybe the video of the room will come up, perhaps. Do we have a video of the room? Oh, okay. Okay. The people in the room will come up to the podium and introduce themselves. Then those of you online can also introduce yourselves. So do you want to take it away, Tom?
Yeah, sure.
Great.
All right, so my name is Tom Honeyman. I work for the Australian Research Data Commons. I can see we're joined by my boss, Andrew Trelaw. So I am the software program manager. And in that program, I oversee a rolling set of activities that are working towards recognition of research software as a first-class output of research. So code sharing is a very important part of that overall program of work. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kira McNeice, Cambridge University Press. Interested in this session because we have several of the journals and societies we work with who are interested in publishing code, and well, their researchers are interested in publishing code that goes along with their data and other research outputs. And we want to be able to recognize that again as a first-class research output, to use the favorite phrase.
So hi, I'm Hugh Shanahan. I am based at Royal Holloway, part of the University of London Federation. I work in the Department of Computer Science there. Main reason I'm here is that I kind of have this ongoing project looking at computational notebooks, so Jupyter notebooks or Markdown and so on. And there's always one sort of outstanding question in terms of how do we publish them? How do we make the 5 million submissions on GitHub actually more findable and so on. So thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Almansick, the Director of Business Operations for Repeta, part of Digital Science, where we assess scientific manuscripts for quality indicators of research, such as whether there are data availability statements and data sharing and code sharing statements. So highly interested in this topic and learning more about the where the policies and will take us forward in this area. So.
Thank you. That's everyone in the room. I don't know if those of you online want to turn on your cameras or say hi or put it in the chat.
Hi, I've already put it in the chat, but I'm notionally Tom's manager. And I'm responsible for yeah, that was the reaction I was hoping for. And I'm responsible for a program of activity around what we call platforms, what you would probably call VREs or virtual laboratories. As well as the research software agenda that Tom is so ably steering. And I'd like to park a question for later, which is in the title, is it time to align goals and publishers' policies? Whose goals? But we don't need to talk about that now.
Thank you, Andrew. That's a good question. Ashley or Ian, are you willing or brave enough to turn on your cameras and say hi? Or if not, put it in the, I can see Ashley's written in the chat.
Hello, I'm Ian. It's 1:45 in the morning and an hour ago I ran out of iced coffee. So I also work at PLOS. I think the goal is more open science, but that's obviously my opinion. And I'm broadly interested in finding the right solutions, the right ways to make that happen. So whether that's policy, whether that's tools or something else. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Hang on in there. Ashley, do you want to say hi?
Sure. Hi, everyone. You know, it's only almost 9 o'clock over here, so now I feel bad for not going on camera. But I just wanted to say hello. I work for the Federal Funding Agency for Museums and Libraries out here and have a background in scholarly communication. So always looking for how to further open science in these different ways. So looking forward to hearing this conversation.
Great, thank you, Ashley. So I think that's everyone that I can see. So I'll kind of carry on with the slides I was sharing. Should they come up? Right. There's a bit of a delay. There we go. So this is just a session outline, just to say that I'm going to present some stuff and then we can talk about some other stuff or similar stuff. And I'll get on with it. So first of all, I just wanted to introduce kind of actually, what do we mean by code when we're talking about code in this session? Certainly something that when I was working with the collaborators on this session, we discovered that we did not have a shared definition of what code and software were. And, you know, if you look at the dictionary definition of code and software, so Tom tells me, they're exactly the same. So I just wanted to acknowledge that there are various terms, code, source code, script, software models that might mean specific things to some people, but to other people, they might mean something slightly different. And that I tend to use them slightly interchangeably, probably because I'm not a software kind of coding person at heart. But the key thing here is that we're talking to code, software, whatever it is that underpins a research publication. And that's kind of central to those findings so that we might want to, you know, surface that alongside the data to enable reproducibility. And I just wanted to kind of acknowledge, and this is from one of our more software focused folks, that, you know, it's software code can be a multifaceted thing. It can be a tool for someone, it could be an outcome or result of research for someone else, it could be the object of research. So actually it can take different forms and kind of take on different meanings for people, that kind of same output. And I think it's also really important to acknowledge, and maybe this will come out in our discussions a bit more, that code or software, whatever you want to call it, is actually a really complex artifact. So it can be giant code, it can be a composite of different bits of code people have written and have been kind of put together. It can be something that is maintained, or it can be something that's written once. It can be written by one person or lots of people, and lots of people who don't necessarily know each other as well. There are, you know, different sets of roles. And, you know, there are different ways that it can be shared. At the moment, it can be put out as a release, or it can be versioned. So actually, it's a fairly complex thing, research output. And there are, you know, these are all important things to think about when we think about kind of sharing code at the kind of basic level. This is all the kind of stuff that someone who might be reusing or looking at it probably needs to know about. And then I just wanted to kind of think about who's actually producing this code, right? So it's central to some disciplines, we all know that, computational biology, clues in the name. But actually, it can also be an analysis tool used by pretty much any discipline. So in archaeology, where kind of my background is, there are definitely people using code there, you know, all the way through to all sorts of other disciplines. And identifying when code has been used can be tricky, especially for those disciplines where it's not a kind of central, well-established tool. So that's kind of one of the problems we have. And also that different disciplines will have different norms about how they view code sharing, or kind of what the kind of priorities they have around what they need to share, or whether it's worth sharing, or kind of whether it counts as a kind of research output, or whether, you know, some of it's just such basic coding that it's not even worth sharing, which is what I've heard from the computational kind of biology community sometimes. Whereas, you know, for other disciplines, that might be like the hardest piece of work they've ever done. It certainly is for me when I try and write code now. And I just wanted to show this graph as well from a paper that was published in PLOS Biology last year that looked at 2.75 million PubMed Central articles and found that only 3.5% were sharing code. Admittedly, this paper didn't look at how many were generating code, so we don't know it's kind of what the max number should be, but certainly it's a really small amount of code that is being shared. And presumably there's more out there, and that's what we're trying to surface. And then I'm just going to kind of point out that there are some policies around code sharing, but not that many, especially when you compare it to something like data sharing. There are kind of far more policies that talk about data than there are code. So I just highlighted a few funder examples. So there's the French National Open Science Plan has stuff in there about code. The European Commission with their Horizon Europe kind of scheme it's going to be launched will have something in it about code. Wellcome Trusts have mentioned code and software for quite a long time. And there's also the UNESCO Open Science recommendations, which of course aren't funded, but, you know, quite a big overarching group of recommendations that do talk about code and software sharing. There are also various publishers and journals with kind of mandatory sharing code policies, but they are few and far between. So we've got a few examples here. And of course, there are some software only journals who their whole thing is sharing software. So they're kind of leading the way, but that's kind of really specific kind of software as a tool. And what do these policies say? Well, the funder ones are all fairly similar, and it kind of bundles in code a lot with data and other kind of research outputs like protocols, and that they should be shared, and they should be shared in line with the FAIR principles. It's largely the policies aren't any more specific than that. It doesn't talk about where they need to be shared or how they should be shared or you know, anything more specific. The funder policies are slightly varied, and I put the AGU one in here, and I guess this is probably one of the more detailed policies in terms that it talks about trusted repositories, and that it has to, the code location has to be in a data availability statement. You have to include citations. But again, that's a policy that's putting code in with data. So it's often we're seeing, you know, the kind of the attitude towards code is being rolled in with kind of the requirements around data. And I guess it's also important to note that a lot of the journals have slightly separate policies for kind of software specifically. So if it's more of that model or kind of standalone type of program, then there are usually more comprehensive rules about how it should be shared, what kind of licensing it should have. So these kind of policies are more to do with that kind of analytical code at smaller scale, is how I tend to think of it. So what are the problems we are trying to solve? There's a list here, and if anyone followed Dan Katz's blog, he produced a slide for me and has written a blog post on it as well. So code needs to be provided for validation so others can understand the computational parts of the work done. And certainly on Tuesday when I was speaking and we asked readers, why do you look at code? 70% of them said to understand the article better. So actually, you know, it's sharing that code is really important for them. And you know, that requires the code to be available. So there, you know, I've had conversation with Tom before about code availability versus kind of code sharing, and you know, what do we mean by these things? We need code for reproducibility so that people can run the work. Of course, we need the data for that as well. And so that requires the code to be runnable. So we, you know, need to know what environment it needs to run in, have the correct versions of things. The code, there's also a problem of reusability. So we need the code to be kind of shared in such a way that can be built upon, other people can incorporate it into their own work. So that often needs good documentation so people know what they're doing, especially you know, kind of clear licensing. There's also the kind of expandability or contributability, that's the right word, of code, so that other people can not just kind of take that code away and do kind of what they like within the reusability sense, but actually improve that code there for others to use. And that, you know, depends on collaboration and versioning and like everything to be available to everyone. And then there's a problem of credit as well, that people are producing code but not necessarily getting the credit for it, or the recognition that they produced it or that it's being reused by others. And so that requires, you know, clear metadata, also clear policies from journals for citing it. So what's at stake? What are the things that could or should happen? So artifacts, code, software, it needs to be properly archived. And we need to make sure that we can retrieve them. We need to be able to make sure that it's properly referenced by the, you know, the people producing it themselves, you know, within their publication, but also by other people, so that it can be identified by others who might want to then go away and find it and reproduce it. And it needs to be properly described. So, you know, we need to get good metadata with a good documentation. It makes it easy to discover, makes it easy to reuse, makes it easier to cite. And of course, like, we need it to be properly cited for credit. And I'm just going to highlight that last one is, you know, the top three are something that the authors really need to do and take action on. And then the last one is the authors need to, you know, make sure that they're citing their own software properly, but also it's other people using it. So that's kind of has, I guess, the more stakeholders than just the author. We thought we'd just share some kind of examples of different solutions that there are for code sharing. They come at different scales and have kind of different benefits. So there's a kind of local stuff where you just keep it in, within your own system, between you and your colleagues, maybe on your own institutional repository or GitLab. And then you move up to the global. So actually maybe you're in the bigger GitHub community, or you're using Bitbucket. It's being harvested by the software heritage where possible. And then you have things that are more like generalist repositories. So is that really the place where code should be? Is it appropriate for that? You have the kind of tech solutions that we were talking about the other day, so the executable kind of ones like Codation and notebooks. And then you have the good old traditional ones, people putting their code in supplementary material or the appendices of their thesis, or a kind of PDF screenshot of code that's kind of put somewhere. And then we go to, I guess, the more kind of software focused ones. There's kind of the paper-like ways of sharing software. So the kind of Journal of Open Source Software and all those kind of types of journals that are specifically set up for software. People can also share bits of their code and kind of the packages that you use on R and Python. And then, we want to get super fancy, we can stick it in the App Store and stuff like that. Or you can share snippets on Stack Overflow, which is definitely a resource I use when I'm coding. And that's much more informal way of sharing code. And but it's quite a community norm that there are different ways that people are sharing their software and their code. And perhaps we need to start trying to rein this in a little bit, or not. There are lots of existing principles and best practices and initiatives, and there is a link to the slide in the shared notes if you want to go away and look those up. But that's just there is a lot of work that's already been doing out there, and I guess we're not trying to necessarily create more best practices, but we're just trying to get everyone potentially to follow them a bit more closely. And I also wanted to acknowledge that there are some RDA groups that kind of relate to this space. There's the Fair for Research Software Working Group, which actually just finished up last week. So there's some people out there with time on their hands. There's one around skills and training to support research software. There's the Software Source Code Interest Group, which is really focused on that kind of the kind of software modeling side of code rather than the analysis code. And there's also the Data Policy Standardization and Implementation Group, which I know Ian is co-chair of, which is looking at how to kind of align and standardize data policies. I thought, code is potentially a similar issue to that. So that might be a group as well that we can work with or learn from. So I'm just going to kind of summarize that there are loads of problems, and they are kind of all related, but areas that could be for different focus, and there are different areas that we could focus on for solutions. They could be cultural, they could be technological, it could be around metadata and recognition and visibility, it could be kind of that openness, so really buying into that kind of open source movement. And it's difficult to, I think, implement all of these solutions at once to answer all of these problems. That's why I really wanted to see if there was some kind of consensus about where we could narrow focus. So I'm going to stop talking and hopefully get you guys talking. But I wanted to start with a bit of gathering your opinions with a Slido poll. So I'm just going to stop sharing my slides and share it. Oh, hang on. I do know how to use technology, I promise. And we go to, right. So hopefully the Slido poll will come up. Great. So if you join us Slido, go to slido.com and enter the number 310680. Hopefully this poll will come up, and you can tell me which problems you think are the most important ones to address. And it's a long list if you kind of scroll down. So hopefully some answers will come up. Is anyone up filling in my poll? Okay.
Do you want us to do like the priority ones, or do you want us to do like good to have?
Oh, do priority ones. Why not? Let's.
As in try and constrain.
Yeah, you can only choose 3, so you have to be constrained in.
So Lauren, it feels like the unclear how effective existing solutions are is it's kind of orthogonal to the other ones.
Maybe we'll ignore it then.
Yeah, that was me thinking that we need a bit more evidence on kind of what's working and what's not working before we try and decide.
Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense.
If things, if we can just carry on as we are, or need to try something new.
Oh yes.
Oh no, like someone needs to vote and make one of those the winner.
Don't forget to hit submit at the bottom.
Oh, thank you, Tom. We have a roving mic now, so if you hear a random voice, it'll be someone in the room.
Does it actually work?
I don't know. Can you hear Tom?
If you're talking into the mic, it totally works, Tom.
Thanks.
Right.
I'm intrigued by the Eurovision style voting block.
Oh, this is.
Be an order. There may be an
Order effect happening here.
Right. Oh, more people voting. All right. This is good because I wanted one clear winner, because I wanted to move on to the next poll with that winner in mind. And we can certainly come back to these other issues around code not being archived. It's not findable, it's not well documented. And I guess they all kind of feed into that lack of shared code. Go on, Tom.
It really interesting given how many sessions there were on reproducibility that it has not featured yet as a vote as well.
Yeah, I also find that interesting. I think often when it comes to code, we still need to get the fundamentals going before we can really worry about reproducibility. Yeah. I'll just scroll down. I guess can you see the results on your screens? Yeah, okay. Right, so I think let's go ahead talking about the lack of shared code, and maybe we can come back to things like, say, the reuse of existing code. I think would be another really interesting area to talk about. So if you look at your screens, you should now have a new poll. So if we're thinking about the lack of shared code, which approaches do you think have the best chance of solving of that problem? No. Oh, we need an other. Oh, sorry, Tom. Feel free to grab the mic.
If I could have voted for it, I would have said that working with particular scholarly communities is a place I'd like to go in terms of them looking at what they deem to be the sort of minimum expectations amongst their peers.
Which you could kind of shoehorn into training / advocacy for researchers, I guess, but I take your point, it is different.
Thanks, that's what I'll
Vote for.
I'm just grabbing a pen and paper so I can write these things down, because I realize I can't take notes on my computer and be super host. Right, we all.
I'd also point out that the policy-based approaches encompasses soft and hard policy and norm-based policy, and I think the other dimension is moral policy. So we have soft moral policy, at the moment, in the form of the UNESCO Open Science recommendation. But then when you move into publisher policy, we have a mix of hard policy and soft policy as well.
Great, thank you. So I guess taking away from this, the things that we probably want to talk about going forward are things around training and advocacy, and those which I guess might encompass the promoting and requiring software, like promoting software citation. And then we can also talk around the policy side of things, and perhaps requiring software citation, and as well as requiring data availability statements. I'm going to change to the last poll. So if we're thinking about that, trying to those different approaches, so whether it's community-based or kind of or policy-based, I was just wondering if there are any particular key, like who's the key stakeholder that we need to get involved, and you can rank these, so you can say who your number one person is that you want to get involved, and we can think about perhaps how we would do that. Right. Okay, that's great. I think everyone's pretty much had their say. So thank you for that. I'm gonna stop sharing. Stop share. There we go. And we can hopefully see each other again. And say hi to, got 2 new people, Paula and Claire. Thanks for joining us. If you want to introduce yourselves in the chat, please go ahead. But what I think has kind of come out of that little poll is that, there's lack of shared code is probably one of our biggest problems. And I'm really interested in exploring a bit more about this kind of the working with researchers and this kind of co-creation of kind of norms and values that Tom was talking about. So I'd just like to spend a bit of time talking about that. Does anyone, do you want to kind of elaborate on what you're saying a bit more, Tom?
I guess the first thing I wanted to say is that we talked about different types of code, but focused a little bit on the form of the code. But something that I've pursued in the AIDC's national agenda for research software is differentiating the different purposes that we have for code. And I think when we talk about lack of code sharing, it's really actually when you refactor this into what is the type of software that they're making, it becomes much clearer what's going on here. So we have this three levels of software which do interrelate with each other, but we talk about analysis code, but actually we're kind of bleaching the meaning of that term a little bit in the agenda, because we mean any bit of software that relates to a specific research project. It's often one-shot code, and it could relate to any aspect of preparing or handling or generating the data through to analyzing and visualizing the software. Now, a lot of this gets written by researchers. A lot of it gets written in the context of a publication, and a lot of it is not shared. But then there are other types of software as well. And we talk about prototype tools, which is the kind of software that demonstrates a new idea, a new method, a new model,
And if anything, the researcher is keen to get the word out about this. I mean, they're essentially promoting the fact that they've created a new thing. And so I'm not suggesting that there's a problem with sharing this kind of code at all. There are some problems with the technology or the acceptance of sharing that code, as in there is the emergence of journals specifically for sharing this type of software, and it may or may not be difficult to publish an article about a new tool in a particular scholarly journal, which has association with other areas other than software. But to that extent, it is possible to get the word out about software. And the third kind of software is what we call research software infrastructure. And this kind of software captures more stable ideas. And by its very nature, it's likely to have existed for a good period of time. And these are the things that are not going to be shared in association with the paper as a supplement. They're going to be shared in the methodology section. They're going to be referenced as, oh, well, of course, we use these standard tools, or, to achieve these standard tasks, we use these, pre-existing tools, or perhaps we implemented a really common method in new software as well. So when you break it down that way, you can see that the real weight of the problem for lack of code sharing exists for analysis code and that kind of software. And then the problems are sort of nuanced and different. Which is not to downplay the importance of software citation. I mean, that's where we're getting when we're talking about those other types of software, the prototype tools and the research software infrastructure. But it's not what I would conventionally associate with the term code sharing, basically.
And so your preference would be to focus on that kind of that first one, would it? Kind of the analysis.
If I was being pragmatic,
yeah,
I'd probably choose the first kind, just because it's the biggest one. Mm-hmm. But I think that I don't want to throw away the other two either. They're also super important. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Huge.
So we did a survey of notebook users in terms of trying to elucidate what were the kind of use cases that they used them for, and really broad set of use cases. But clearly, the number one was the one that you were talking about, which was the analysis type of stuff. And yeah, you're absolutely. I think that sort of chimes, particularly what you've also been finding in terms of people reading through stuff and so on, and when you kind of go to really the long tail, although everybody hates talking about these kind of conversations, is you get to the Excel spreadsheets, because that's the analysis as well,
Yeah, that's right. There are also these kind of mixed objects, right? So Excel is a Frankensteinian mix of macros and tabular data, or really common in the life sciences and social sciences is that the researchers want to provide a compendium. A research compendium is one of the emerging phrases. That bundles together data and software in a convenience package, so that you can have everything there ready to go to re-execute and verify the results. I think Excel spreadsheets are in scope for sure. Yeah, I wish they were. I mean, yeah, but it's not. It doesn't come, to mind for a lot of people.
Which is quite interesting when you think about what we recommend with data, and we say don't put it in a proprietary format, you put it as a CSV, and you lose all of that kind of processing that comes with the Excel formulas.
Yeah, so my problem with Excel is not, well, I mean, I have a variety of problems with Excel, but my concern about this particular appearance of the Excel Hydra is a separation of concerns, that because it's blending together data and things that act on the data, it makes it much, much harder to deal with. And going back to Tom's comment about a compendium that bundles together data and code, I'm fine with that as long as what it's bundling together is pointers to the data and pointers to the code. That is, I want the data and the code to have separate existences, to be separately citable, to be separately managed and separately accessible, but then tied together in some form of written content. I don't know, maybe a journal article, crazy idea. But I don't want them globbed together in a way that makes them hard to pull apart. And that's the thing that I find, well, it's one of the things I find concerning about Excel as a vehicle for doing that bundling.
Yeah, I was just to say, Paula, if you want to unmute yourself and talk, go ahead, but feel free to use the chat if not. But yeah, separation of think code and data is something I think we all probably agree is a good thing, and why I think it's often treated kind of separately yet together in those policies. You know, it's you need both, but they should be separate.
I basically agree, but I do also think that we need to think about this in terms of primary challenges and secondary challenges, and meeting a researcher where they're at is probably a good way to frame this in the first instance. And yeah, I think we have to recognize that those that if code sharing is what we're trying to achieve, first and foremost, we're going to have to accept it in the form that they're willing to share it in to some degree. And then once we get a certain amount, a certain body of evidence about the kind of unworkable nature of these, or, you know, locked up nature of these compendia and these Excel spreadsheets. And I mean, yeah, a nightmare of containers or all sorts of, you know, solutions to this problem. Only then can we really start to say, well, okay, maybe we need to standardize or think about common approaches. Yeah, Kira.
Yeah, I agree. We've got to convince them to share the spreadsheets before we can convince them to share them in a way that can be separated out and cited separately. I liked your phrase one-shot code. I think that was a really interesting one. And I think if we're looking at that first category of code sharing, things that are just used for specific analysis, I feel like the challenge there is going to be convincing researchers of the value of sharing that code. Like, I mean, if it's not going to be reused, it's unlikely to be cited by anyone. It's not going to be for someone else's analysis. It's literally just for a one-off research project. Then I guess the main value of that is in the reproducibility or the transparency of the analysis. Yeah, transparency of analysis, which totally agree is an important thing. And the few journals we have that are requiring researchers to share code, it's entirely for the purpose of transparency of analysis. And it's mostly in political science, where there was a real drive to do that because of some high profile issues some years ago. So that, yeah, it came from the community. It came from that drive to make the analysis transparent. So I guess as with data sharing, one of the main challenges is the advocacy and the training for researchers and why that's really important and convincing them of the value of it.
So to kind of add in on that on that point, I think there's I mean, I agree that yeah, everything being transparent and indeed reproducible. So that thing that ideally you're able to just pop it open and then on your own machine just go click 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 click. Yeah, fine. It does what it says on the tin. But also it's the fact that people are saying, well, we don't use this software. It's not being reused because it's never actually appears. So there's kind of, so if it was there and it was more available, you know, the thing that happens in that cycle when you get a piece of paper, get some code to work with, you just do that first thing of, does it do what it says on the tin? But then can I actually take another data set, pop it in, see what happens and play around with it? Is that almost playing about and seeing what you can do with it is really important. And there's nothing that infrastructure isn't there at the present moment to do that kind of thing. Everybody's doing everything from scratch. Sorry. Anyway.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I kind of agree with that point. With our survey findings, we find like 48% of people want to reuse the code, whether it's just a bit of it to make a nice graph, or whether it's a large chunk of it to do something similar with their own data. So from disciplines like computational biology, where we do have a good kind of community attitude towards code sharing, I think, you know, we do have the evidence that there is value in sharing that kind of one-off code. And I think that's a nice example. I guess that the challenge then is, how do we get other disciplines to start thinking in the same way?
I was going to say, I think there's some interesting opportunities that would, if we imagine a world where code sharing was more available, was more prevalent. There's some interesting opportunities for how we could bolster science or research as a more robust discipline. It's not just that you're creating a transparent record of what's being done. Code is quite machine actionable, and we can, for instance, properly documented analysis code gives us the possibility of identifying errors in particularly underlying pieces of code, and then automating the review of flagging papers that might have been compromised because they had a dependent piece of software in them. We can also look at trends in terms of favorite pools, or what are common tools used as captured in that analysis code. And then finally, we have the opportunity to build a system of transitive credit. So sometimes with analysis code, the code that is being referenced within that code is other cascading types of research software. Per the distinctions I made before, they might be experimenting with a prototype tool or a new piece of software and demonstrating whether it worked or not for their particular analysis. Or they might be depending upon tools or libraries of functions that are more commonly used, but which struggle to get the recognition that they need in order to persist. So there's all these secondary uses that we could get out of this stuff, not just, and they have nothing to do with the researcher or the paper in a sense. And so I think in terms of advocacy, we could lean into that and say, you're actually supporting the people that you're working, whose work you're building upon as well by doing it. It's a kind of different type of citation, if you like.
Yeah. Great. I see Paula's got a hand up. Do you want to chip in, Paula?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for giving me time to speak. I joined the session a bit late. I apologize for that. But related to the latest comments, I wanted to add a plug for a preprint that we put up maybe 2 weeks ago. It's called "Why Don't We Share Data and Code? Perceived Barriers and Benefits to Public Archiving Practices." It's targeted to researchers, and it's for the ecological sciences. This is just one effort that we are doing in guidance, and just taking from the comments before in the room, said political sciences is one that's striving to share code. I think many other domains are also doing it in their own ways. Astronomy, I know they've been sharing code for longer than other sciences. This was put together by a group of researchers who are working in ecology. So the examples might relate to them, but in me being involved in this work, I also suggested to open this up to any cross-domain sciences, maybe a different journal where we are going to publish this, because there are points that were raised that apply to any sciences. So at the moment it's a preprint. I think we can also get some comments, and just to add to the plug, there is the Free Knowledge Foundation, it's a non-for-profit organization that tries to have incentives for improving transparency in science, and they act doing pledges, so people can pledge to do an action when there's enough mass commitment. And we launch another one for the neurosciences, where people are willing to share their code once the publication is accepted. Although publishers already have some in their requirements, this is a further incentive for people to do it, even if it's not required by the publishers. So I think these are two different examples from different domains, but things are happening, and it gives me a perspective of a better future. So I just wanted you to be aware of those.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Paula. Yeah, they're really interesting. And I think perhaps identifying those communities where things are happening is a really great resource. So I often, from my work in institutions, you often start in one department who adopt something, and then you go to their close neighbors and they say, oh yeah, okay, if they do it, we'll do it. So it's nice to think about that kind of network, I think, and that kind of those nodes, and how we might be able to kind of move that wave of co-chairing kind of on that way. Just check no one's got any other comments. Just check the chat. Thank you, Andrew, for putting things into the chat for me. So I guess we're all kind of agreed that kind of getting that kind of analysis, one shot code shared more is something that we need to focus on, reaching out to those communities and kind of having a, really understanding their attitudes and what kind of barriers they feel like they might be facing is something we need to be doing. Tom?
So one area of policy change that I wanted to raise. So I don't know if you mentioned the Force 11 task force on software citation.
I didn't, but I should have done because I'm on that task force.
Oh dear. Having done a bit of time digging around in publisher policies, one area of inconsistency that I don't think is too controversial is the idea of promoting direct citation of the software. That what that clashes against is that many authors of software tools are keen to direct people to a paper about the software, because that is, again, it's meeting them where they're at. If they want to get credit for their work, they may well have published in a regular journal, a regular paper about the software. And one of the key recommendations out of that group is that in that situation, there should be some direction to authors to cite both the paper about the software, but also to cite the software directly. And when there is no clarification, then to actually go to the effort of citing the software directly to change culture. Hugh.
Yeah, and I think the thing I'd really like us to stop doing is that business of papers where there's a link that the authors are being helpful, being quote helpful by putting a link to the download URL as a footnote on the page. And it's like, no, put it in the bibliography. That's where it's supposed to go. Yeah. I think yeah. That's a rant. Sorry.
I mean, I certainly know from working with that Force 11 group that they would definitely like the software citation principles to be promoted more widely and more adopted. So I think that's certainly something we can help encourage and push forward. Do you see that being something that publishers should be doing, institutions should be doing? Is that part of the advocacy?
I don't think it necessarily needs to be laid down in policy as a first step. It could be in author guidance. We have seen specific scholarly groups publish aspirational policy suggesting that this is the right way to do it. That's also a good place to do it. And I'm not sure that the answer is a single one. I think it kind of depends where those communities are at and how radical a change it would be within publisher policy. So for some publishers, it would be a matter of just a small addition to what they're already saying around expectations around citation, and maybe pointing off to some additional guidance. And in others, it would be quite a radical change because they don't have any position on software citation. So that's a very long way of saying it depends, basically.
I mean, as a publisher, I'll just come back on that. And I think there's one thing about saying researchers have to do something. Then there's another thing about, making sure that they do it. And it's that compliance piece, I think, is very hard to do. I mean, I'm sure Kira's going to chip in with something. And I think it would be interesting to understand a bit more about the publishers who are mandating things around code sharing, like actually how compliant are their journals?
Yeah, I will chip in and agree with Lauren on that. I mean, it's very easy for me to say to a journal, put this guidance on your homepage, tell people how they should be citing software. Actually getting authors to do it is a whole different thing. And I think there's plenty of studies out there to do with data sharing and things that show that if you just suggest people do the right thing, you don't actually get many of them doing it. You have to mandate and you have to have processes to enforce it. And that, I think, is a much bigger piece of work.
Yeah, I mean, even with our recent computational biology mandated policy, when we did the analysis, we found that, something it should be almost 100% of people are sharing code, but in reality, only 87% of people were giving a link to code. And, I need to do more work and work out what those 13% were doing, or, did they actually have code or not? But there's, whilst I think the vast majority of people will conform to a journal's policy because they want to get published, there's always gaps. We can't just rely on those mandates.
I guess that's, I mean, Andrew mentioned the Center for Open Science strategy for culture change before. And that's in that model, the suggested sort of first port of call would be to look at what infrastructure changes you can make to make this kind of shift possible. And I think in this particular situation, the kinds of things that I would imagine is perhaps either a process step or an automation in article acceptance, where URLs in footnotes, for instance, are flagged as if they point to software to bounce back to the authors and say, well, actually, this is a situation where the what you could do is more formally cite this software with a stable reference. The other thing in talking with different publishers about this stuff is, in some situations, it's highly appropriate that they then also cite, I mean, go reference the full form of the Force 11 group's suggestions, but particularly when we're talking about verifying science, it's super important that you reference the version that you used to do the analysis as well, at the very least. So it just one tangible step would be, which would require a lot of work on the part of the publisher, that isn't hard policy, is thinking about those systems and processes that flag things. I don't know if there are similar steps or ideas about doing that for data as well, for instance. So stopping people from putting up a website or whatever. Yeah.
I mean, like, again, we can quite easily introduce a checkbox in Scholar One for the author to say, yes, I have properly cited my data and my code, and it's all in a references and not in a footnote. But, whether they're actually doing that or just ticking the box is, actually getting someone to manually check it again is.
What if that checkbox was a field to enter the a landing page for the data set, or a DOI, or both, and similarly for the software as well, followed with a link off to some guidance about how to achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with Kira. This is something I've learned since coming to a publisher, is that things like our data availability statement checks take something like 20 minutes per paper. And, you know, you scale that up to, you know, we've only got 12 journals or something, but one of them plus one, you scale that up, that's a lot of people time. And then you start adding kind of code checks and it gets busier and busier. I know we've got kind of Andrew and Paula with their hands up.
I was just going to agree again that, yeah, I talked to our systems guys and they're like, we can put in a field and have it automatically validated somehow. But yeah, the actual practice of going through that adds a lot of time.
Yeah. Andrew, you had your hand up first. Do you want to chip in?
Yeah, I was just wondering how many people were familiar with the Open Science Framework strategy for culture change. Does everyone, we're all over it? We all know what we're talking about here?
We've got some nods, some shaking heads.
Okay, well, okay, I was going to share my screen, but it's not going to work. The host has disabled me, which is probably a good idea. Essentially, the idea is that you need to operate at a variety of different levels. So you need infrastructure to make it possible, which is what Tom was just talking about. You need the user interface to make it easy. You need the communities to make it normative, that this is how we do things. You need incentives built into the system to make it rewarding. And you need policy to make it required. And the point is, I don't actually like the way it's presented in a pyramid, by the way, but the point of this is you need to do all of those. You can't just focus on the infrastructure or on the norming or on the policy. You actually need to operate across all of those levels simultaneously to actually drive culture change that sticks. I put the link in the collaborative notes to the document I'm referencing.
Thank you, Andrew. Paula, did you want to come in on something?
Thank you. Mine it's a comment. It's a story that I heard from researchers having problems when they are trying to do the right thing with the publishers. So the first one is they try to acknowledge everything that they use, the data sets and the code and everything, and they reach a maximum number of citations they could add to the paper, and they didn't know what to do. And I think that's something that literally publishers need to think about a bit more in depth, like how do you enable them to actually do the right thing. And the other one is about persistent identifiers. We want to link everything that is digital, and now there's persistent identifiers for instruments. This researcher was using a high performance computer, which is a supercomputer. This high performance computer had a PID, a persistent identifier, and they wanted to make people aware that this was instrumental to the results. So they wanted to cite that in the paper, and they said they couldn't add it to the references because it wasn't a bibliographic reference. So they had to go back and forth many times in trying to add it, and at the end it's just added into the acknowledgements. So things like that, when we are enabling things for researchers to use, then we actually should open the doors for them instead of closing them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point you've made there, Paula. And I say certainly at PLOS we don't limit citations, and we have a method section as long as you like. But I agree, that's a problem in general, I think, for scholarly publishing. Kira, did you have something? Oh, okay.
I think it's a really important point. And I think when we engage with ways of doing scholarly publishing or norms in scholarly publishing that have been around for hundreds of years, I think the concept of referencing has been around for hundreds of years at least, then we are going to bump up against these limits and these constraints that don't necessarily help us achieve what we're trying to do. And in many ways, ideally, I guess this falls into those secondary categories, like what we were saying about separating software and data, and then also ensuring reproducibility of code. References is sort of does so many different things. The references section does so many things. You're acknowledging things. You're also sort of documenting the solid points upon which you built your analysis. But particularly with analysis code, what you're doing is you're documenting the process. It's like a different way of expressing the methodology section as well. And so I guess the other thing to do is to maybe innovate in that space and think about the relationship between some publications and the methodology section, which is a fairly often required section in an article, and what the relationship would be between the use of computational tools in that section and how you capture that information. Yeah.
Thanks, Tom. Andrew, is your hand up for a new point, or is that left over from before? Okay, hand down, great.
Sorry.
No worries. I think this is all really interesting. I think what's coming out is that, I think as Andrew said, there's those layers to behavioral change that need to happen together. So that I think there's a piece around kind of community involvement and kind of understanding their norms and working with them where they're at to take just one step forward at a time. There's also that kind of potential policy piece of really trying to embed something as simple as citations to make sure that we're all kind of agreeing that this is an important thing. And then again, we can kind of potentially move that forward one step at a time. We've got about 15 minutes left. I just wondered if we wanted to touch briefly on that kind of reuse of code aspect that was kind of highlighted in the kind of issues we think are important to solve. And if anyone wanted to oh yeah, we can do. Oh, okay. Let's see, I'm going to accept Tom's suggestion then. We'll park reuse of code for another day and perhaps talk about next steps, because Tom reckons it'll take us a while to work that one out. And if we work it out quickly, we can have a, no, I was going to say have a cup of coffee. Right, so yeah, I guess next steps of kind of where we want to go with this. I mean, as I was saying, I think there are kind of there's the two aspects: there's the community thing and then the kind of policy related thing. And I guess there are already a couple of groups working around in that space. And it's the question, I suppose, is whether we kind of tag into those groups or we form something new. Sorry, I'm just checking the chat that's going on. Yeah.
Sorry, it's a response to a previous comment in the chat.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I kind of try to keep my eye on lots of different things at once. So I guess one step is to kind of talk to those groups. And I know that there are some people online who are part of those groups, some people in the room who are part of those groups, and see if we can form some kind of working group that works within the kind of framework of that group moving forward, so we don't have to set up a whole new RDA group. But I think, yeah, I mean, those are the two aspects that I see going forward. I don't know if you guys think that's the same kind of thing. Yeah. So policy and communities. And the kind of what is it? Sorry, Hugh, did you want to microphone?
Yeah, and I would say that we really need to, from what we've talked about now, that the emphasis really should be on that analysis software side of things, to be very, very explicit, so that we're not covering in any sort of statement that's there, that it's really being explicit. This is what we're honing in on, rather than say like packages or monolithic pieces of software that everybody uses in a discipline. I think that's an important thing to focus on. So, sorry.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of sort of sharing best practices and guidance and policy, even before we start mandating things. It would be really helpful. I was talking to a group of people some researchers recently, and they were talking about, citing GitHub. And I was like, did you know, someone asked like, oh, but can we give it a DOI? Can we make it properly citable? I'm like, yeah, there's a button, press to send it to Zenodo. You can do that, and it will have a DOI. People don't know these sorts of things. And these are people who do like write a lot of code for research and are using GitHub all the time, and they don't know they can literally just press a button and create a whole citable thing on Zenodo right there with a DOI.
So, I mean, that's straightforwardly one of the bits of advocacy that we do at the AIDC. We have a very simple minimum steps to get you across the line to do a good job of turning your code into a citable form with exactly this in mind, so that there's just, it's got diagrams, it looks pretty, and it's only like a page, I think, in the end. But it's just like, what do you need to do? That we try to flick out to the right communities or promote in other activities as well. I think, yeah, to a certain extent, we're just doing a bit of that, just awareness raising.
So do you think there would be a kind of value or a benefit in producing or collating guidelines that both publishers and institutions kind of both share? Like if we are all pointing to the same thing and saying the same message, which I know we probably are, but perhaps, or you don't think so? No. Okay. I think some of us probably are.
Yes, yeah. But more of that.
But yeah, more of that, more in a joined up way. Yeah. Alignment of goals, yeah. Do you have something, Kira?
Just another anecdote I was thinking of about a new journal that was being set up, and the editor really wanted to have a code sharing stream, and they're like, oh, but we can't have people citing GitHub because that can change, so we want them to put all the code in their supplementary materials. And I was like, no, come on. So yeah, I think the advocacy, just putting the basic guidance out there and talking about it more, like being a bit more vocal, shouting about, hey, here's how you can actually share your code in a way that's going to be citable and preserved. And
well, so, okay, under a typical RDA structure, this would mean establishing a working group, and we don't need to come up with a recommendation to do that. But one of the most obvious activities that you would do in a working group in that context is to collate lists of evidence and push that out as a supporting output to make it available to others. And the act of forming the group itself kind of creates a point of energy for people to gather around and to work on that. And it could just be that people post links. It could be if publishers join, for instance, that they would just say, look, this is where our policy is. This is what guidance we currently provide. And then just simply comparing across those things and saying, okay, well, actually, I like what Taylor and Francis is doing, or I like what, Giga Science is doing, or whatever, is sort of success in a sense. But that would mean establishing a working group, basically. And that would mean finding chairs, and it would mean committing to, the other parts of the process. But what you end up with is RDA recognized outputs at the end, which have some gravity to them. So do we want to go that far, or do we just want to,
Interest group level.
Well, that would be, Mary said, is it interest group level? If that were the case, then what we would be doing is perhaps we would agree to meet again at another plenary. And maybe instead of doing a BoF, we could approach either the software source code interest group or the data policy interest group, and say, could we present our results in that context? So that would be a smaller scale version.
Yeah. I think
yes.
the chat
and Ian is here too. So, I mean, he can comment on whether, as a co-chair, maybe not talking entirely on behalf of the other co-chairs, but whether that would work.
Yeah, and Ian, if you don't want to speak just yet, Andrew's got his hand raised. So Andrew, do you want to chip in, and then maybe Ian?
Yeah, so I wanted to nuance what Ian was saying slightly. I guess it depends on whether you want to do something that has a particular, I was going to say narrowly, maybe narrow is too harsh, but a well-defined focus as an output, which is one possibility. And if that's the case, sure, setting up a working group, as Tom suggested, would be fine. But it may be that what you want to do is you want to continue the conversation and share things. And as Ian pointed out, you can have an interest group which produces supporting output. You don't have to set up a working group. The interest group doesn't have to go away after 18 months. You can kind of continue the discussion. And you can have interest groups that meet monthly and do stuff. They don't just have to be, let's check in with each other in 6 months' time and see what's happened in the world, although you can do that as well. So I think for me, the question is whether you want to do something that's very focused or whether it's too early for that and you simply want to share what's going on in the world.
Thank you, Andrew. I think Kira's got.
I was just going to. Is that on? Okay. Yeah, I don't think we're quite at the point of having a really well-defined narrow focus yet. I don't think we're quite at the point of saying we know exactly what we want to do in a working group and have a specific output. So yeah, my leaning would be towards having an interest group at this stage. And yeah, maybe definitely meeting more regularly than every 6 months and just continuing to talk about. And if a more defined focus comes out of that, then we can definitely, resolve those time commitment issues that Ian mentioned in the chat with a working group.
Great. Ian, do you want to chip in?
Well, Paul has just asked my question. In case I missed it, in terms of the output, like what is the goal of the output? I think it might be a collection of things that are believed to or known to increase sharing of code. And so that could be a collection of things like policies or tools or initiatives or projects or examples. I guess that's what that might look like. But yeah, Paula has the right question. Just if an output is being produced, what's it trying to achieve? And yeah, I'm interested in views on that, or if it's answered and I just missed it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Kira.
Yeah, well, maybe that collection of things, but operating within that culture change framework and thinking of like what things we can find in each of those categories and how we can push forward each of those categories.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I kind of think I was thinking about.
Right. I was going to mention at the infrastructure level, if people in the room were aware of the Cite as service, where you can paste in a GitHub repo or a URL or whatever, or a name of a piece of software, and it will attempt to look for the citation form for that piece of software, for instance. So that there's a piece of infrastructure that not everybody is aware of. That's quite useful. Citeas.org, cite as in CITE as.org.
Yeah, Andrew.
Sorry to keep booming in as a voice from above. So I really like Kira's idea of looking at things according to each of those different layers in the model. I think that's a really nice way of thinking about the problem space. And I'm wondering then if you could do a little bit of what we're trying to do in the Global Open Research Commons Interest Group, which is do the environmental scan or landscape analysis or whatever we're going to call it. Here's the things that are happening. And then can we abstract from the things that are happening what we see as, I'm not going to say best practice, but as good practice. Here are 10 different journal policies. What are the common elements, or what are the 3 things out of those journal this set that we want to promote? Here are 15 different infrastructure solutions. What are the 2 or 3 that we want to get behind and push? So I could absolutely see that as a useful piece of work that could be done.
And I'm halfway there on what you're suggesting, Andrew. I've already reviewed a bunch of journal and publisher policies, and I've compiled notes. It's just one of those messy spreadsheets that people are apparently reluctant to share. But I think this feels like a safe space to share it in.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, and I like this idea of an interest group, and we can, I guess, talk about exactly what we know and what we need to know, and then kind of the next steps, thinking about actually how we're gonna go beyond that into the community, or to people who write the policies, and influence them. Okay, right. Any last comments? Yes. I just asked, let me save the chat before you close the meeting. I think with that, we've got kind of 3 minutes to time. So I think unless anyone's got any other kind of remarks, we'll leave it there. I'd just like to say thank you very much for a really interesting discussion. I've enjoyed this morning thoroughly, and I think we've got some really good kind of alignment in the room about the issues that are important and potentially worth exploring a bit more. I will go away and I'll add all the notes I've been scribbling on a piece of paper to that shared document, and then Tom and I will kind of chat with our kind of co-organisers who can't be here today, and take forward that idea of an interest group. If you've not added your name to the attendee list in the shared document, please do so, because I will be using that to contact you and let you know what's going on. There's no obligation to join that interest group if your name's on the shared document, so don't worry about committing to something just yet. But I'd just like to just say thank you very much to those of you online who've stayed up late or got up early or just made this part of your day, and thank you very much to everybody in the room for coming today. Thank you.
Thanks for pulling it together. It was really interesting.
Thank you.